Class 8, let's continue the chapter. Chapter 2, the organs of Indian government, the Union Executive. Okay, in the previous last video, we discussed about the permanent and the political executives and qualifications of president term, vacancy, impeachment, emoluments, and president's elections, powers of the president we were discussing, and till executive powers we have done. Now from in today's class we'll start legislative powers of the president. Okay, let's start the class. Okay, the legislative powers. The president is an integral part, very important part of the parliament. So under this the president has power to summon and prorogue the parliament. So summons means to call all the members to meet, right? And prorogues means to discontinue the meeting, or to discontinue, that is prorogue. So the president has right to summon and prorogue the parliament. Second is to dissolve the Lok Sabha. So the president has the power to dissolve Lok Sabha on the advice of the Prime Minister before the expiry of its full term. Next is nomination of MPs. So MPs means member of parliaments. We all know that the president nominates 12 members to Rajya Sabha and 2 members to Lok Sabha. So he nominates the MPs, right, member of parliaments. And prior sanctions before introducing certain bills. So before introducing ordinary bill or that money bill, his approval is must, right? So the president grants prior sanctions for the introductions of certain bills, such as money bill, a bill for a creation of new states, or a bill for alteration in the territories of states. So these bills, before introductions, they have to be sanctioned by the president. Assent to legislation. So whether it's a money bill or ordinary bill, that those bills finally will be, or will without approval of the president, or without assent of him or her, the bill cannot be passed. Next is to issue an ordinances. So ordinances means it's an order given by the president in emergencies. So emergencies means when the parliament is not in session. In that case, the president issue an ordinance, and when the president is satisfied that immediate action is to be taken, is required, in that condition also he or she, the president, may order may issue an ordinance. And however, the ordinance has to be placed before the parliament within 6 weeks from its reassembly. So this is important, just underline, the ordinance has to be placed before. The president can issue an ordinance, but that ordinance has to be placed before the parliament within 6 weeks from its reassembly. This is important. So let's sum up the legislative powers of the president. Number 1, he or she summons and prorogues the parliament. Secondly, he or she dissolves the Lok Sabha and nominates the member of parliaments, both to Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and prior sanction before introducing of certain bills, right? And assent to legislation, that means he or she gives his or her assent to the bills, whether it's a money bill or ordinary bill. And the next one is he or she issues an ordinances in emergency, right? in emergencies, we can say. Now come to the judicial powers of the president. Okay, in judicial powers of the president can modify the punishment, right? So the president can grant pardon and remission of punishment passed by any court in 3 cases. Number 1, in case of death punishment, in case of lifetime imprisonment, and in case of where the punishment is given by a court martial. So underline this court martial. Court martial is to send army personnel for the trial in the military court, right? That is court martial. So where the punishment, next is where the punishment is for an offense against the union law. It may be noted that to modify punishment is a matter of grace or mercy on convict's appeal to the president. It is not a right of the convicted person. Next is power to consult the Supreme Court. The president can seek legal advice of the Supreme Court on any question of law. It is bound to give its opinion on a point of law, but the president is free to accept the opinion of the Supreme Court or not. Okay, from this judicial powers of the president, we come to know that the president has a power to grant pardon or to reduce the punishment that a person receives, right? So he has a power to reduce the punishment that a person receives. Okay, and but he can grant grant pardon only in the certain cases, certain conditions or cases, like number 1, the punishment with the punishment or a sentence is by a court martial, by military court, right? Second is the punishment is for offenses against the union law, and third is in all the cases sentence of death. So these cases, these are the cases under which the president can give or can grant pardons, right? Now next is, okay, the president is not answerable for the exercise of his duties of office. Clear? He is not answerable. And no criminal proceeding shall be instituted against the president in any court during the term of his or her office. So these are also the judicial powers of the president. Clear? Okay, now next come to the emergency powers. Okay, the president can impose this emergency powers in the 3 cases. Number 1 is financial emergency, number 2 national emergencies, and number 4 is constitutional emergency. So here it's written in national emergency caused by war, external aggressions, or armed rebellion inside the country. That is under Article 352. He can impose emergency power in that time. Second is constitutional emergency caused by breakdown of the constitutional machinery. When there is a breakdown of rules and regulations, then in that time, in that condition, in that state, Article 356 will be imposed. So that comes under the constitutional emergency. Next is financial instability or financial emergency. During that, when the financial stability is not stable in India or of India, that comes under Article 360. In that cases also, he or she can impose this emergency powers in the state or in a country, right? Now next is discretionary powers. Now from this we come to know that president is only a figurehead. That means that he is only the constitutional head of a state, right? So but he has very important role to play in the actual working of the parliamentary system in our country. So when there is no single party getting a clear-cut majority, then coalition government will establish. So coalition government or coalition politics means it's not a single party government, it's a mixture of 2 or 3 parties, right? So when there is no clear-cut majority or party getting a clear-cut majority, coalition of parties would be established to form a government, right? So the president has to use his individual judgment. In that case, he will use his power or his judgment, and he will invite such a leader to the head of the government as a prime minister. So in this case, coalition government or coalition party, he has a distinctive role for selecting a leader as a prime minister, right? So that comes under this discretionary power of the president. Clear? Okay, now next is the position of the president. So the position of the president, we all know he is the nominal or the constitutional head of a state, right? So he is a figure head only, and though he represents the Indian nation, but he does not rule on it. Clear? The real power lies in the hand of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. That is why when we talk about the position of president, the president is a nominal constitutional head or figurehead or golden zero for only ceremonial purposes. Clear? Okay, now next is limitations on the president. Limitations means drawbacks on the limitations of his or her power. Limitations on the president. Okay, now there are two main limitations on the president. Now what are these 2 limitations? Okay, the president is only the constitutional head of a state, so whatever decision he or she takes, the president takes, whatever decision the president takes, before that decision, the president has to take advice from the prime minister and the Council of Ministers, right? So this is one of the limitations on the president's power, right? So here it's written there is the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers to aid and advise the president in the exercise of his power, discussed and discussions also, and his powers also, right? So whatever decision he or she will take, that has to be in the consultation of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, right? Now next is all proclamation of emergency is made by the President under Article 352, 356 and 360 have to be laid before Parliament for approval within 1 month. If a proclamation of emergency is not approved in the Parliament, it becomes null and void. That means it becomes null and void and ceases to operate. That cannot be imposed if it is not approved within that 1 month, that emergency. So these are the limitations on president's power. Clear? Okay, now next come to the vice president. Next topic. So the vice president is the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha, right? The present vice president of India is Venkaiah Naidu. So let's talk about the qualifications of the vice president. Must be a citizen of India, and must not less than 35 years of age, and should be qualified. He or she must be qualified for election as a member of Rajya Sabha. For president, he or she must be a member of Lok Sabha, and for vice president, he or she must be the member of Rajya Sabha, right? So this is the difference. And next qualification is he or she should not hold office of profit. Clear? Now next is term. Term is 5 years. He or she can, once he or she is elected, he or she can serve for 5 years. So Before the expiry term, the vice president can also resign from his or her office or post in writing to the president, right? So, but however, the vice president continues in his or her office until the next successor joins the office, right? Next is removal. That is impeachment. The vice president may be removed by a majority resolution of the Rajya Sabha supported by the Lok Sabha members, right? Emoluments, the vice president is getting 4 lakh per month along with the daily allowances, and as well as when he acts as a president, the vice president draws the same emoluments as the president draws, right? So in absence of the president, when vice president acts as a president, then the vice president will have the same emoluments as the president, right? Next is election. So we all know that the election, the vice president is elected by the electoral college, but the state legislatures have no hand in the election of vice president. Both the houses of the parliament, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, sitting together elect the vice president, but there is no hand of, or there is the legislature, state legislatures have no hand in the election of vice president. So this is the only difference in the election of the president and the election of vice president. In the election of president, electoral college consists of both the elected member of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and the state legislatures. Right, elected members of state legislatures also involved in that. But in case of election of vice president, electoral college elects the vice president, but in that electoral college, the state legislatures have no hand. That means only the elected members of the parliament, that means the elected member of Lok Sabha and elected member of Rajya Sabha involved, right, in the election of vice president. Okay, now next is powers and functions of the vice president. So he performs the following functions as a chairman of the Rajya Sabha. Number 1, as we all know, he or she is the ex officio chairman of the Rajya Sabha, right? So he or she regulates the proceeding of the house, that means Rajya Sabha. Next, he or she decides about the admissibility of a question or a resolution. So he decides what type of questions to be asked first, right? So he decides about the admissibility of the questions or a resolution in the house, that is, house means Rajya Sabha. Okay, now as a vice president, he has no significant function except ceremonial, that means to receive certain categories or VIP from abroad. So he takes over as a president in case of, now he takes the office of president in case of, number 1, death of the president in the office. In that case, he will take the charge of as a president. And if the president resigns from his or her post, or removal of the president, right? So in case of illness, also absence, or from any other reason, when the president is unable to discharge his functions, in that cases only the vice president will act as a president. But his position as a vice president is dignified but not very strong. Okay, now come to the next topic, the Prime Minister, very, very important topic. So President, as we all know, he is the leader of the nation, and the Prime Minister is the real executive head of a state, and he is appointed by the President, right? And in real, we can say the Prime Minister is the leader of the majority or the coalition parties in the Lok Sabha. So he is elected as such by the party or party's MPs, and the president has to invite him to form the government, right? Okay, now here in book it's written in 1999 the BJP led NDA. What is the full form of NDA? National Democratic Alliance, right? Got a clear-cut majority in the Lok Sabha. The NDA elected Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee as its leader, and he was sworn in as the Prime Minister by the President on 13th October 1999. In 2009, the Congress Party, along with its electoral allies, that is UPA, that means United Progressive Alliance, got the majority in the Lok Sabha elections. Dr. Manmohan Singh became the Prime Minister, and from 2019 to till date, the NDA, we know, National Democratic Alliance, got a clear-cut majority, and Mr. Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister, right? Now next is powers, functions and the position of the Prime Minister. We may study the powers, functions and position of the Prime Minister under the following headings. It's given: number 1, Prime Minister and his relations with the President, Prime Minister and his relation with his Council of Ministers, Prime Minister and his relationship with the Cabinet and the Council of Ministers, Prime Minister and his relations with the Parliament, Prime Minister and his role as in the foreign affairs, and Prime Minister as a leader of the nation. So these are very, very important topics. Number 1, Prime Minister and his relation with the President. Before moving to the powers and the functions and position of the Prime Minister, let me tell you about the categories of ministers, right? Types of ministers. So we have 3 types of categories of ministers. The top one, first one is the first ranking ministers are known as cabinet ministers, who are headed by the Prime Minister, right? So only selective ministers are there who are the part of cabinet ministers, and they are headed by as a head. Prime Minister is at the head, right? Okay, and so when we talk about the cabinet ministers are the top ranking ministers. They hold very important ranks and holding very important portfolios. So they are the cabinet ministers. Now second category is ministers of state, right? Ministers of states come under the second category of ministers. Now the third one is deputy ministers. So deputy ministers, they are the third ranking ministers, right? So these are the 3 categories of ministers, and together all these ministers together we call Council of Ministers. Clear? All these 3 categories of ministers together we call Council of Ministers. Okay, now come to the powers, functions and position of the Prime Minister in relation with the President. Okay, as we all know that the Prime Minister is a line of communication between the Council of Ministers and the Council of Ministers, or we can say Cabinet. We are talking about the President, relation with the President. So the Cabinet and the President, right? So he conveys, that means Prime Minister conveys Cabinet's decision to the President and keeps him informed of all national or foreign matters of the government. So here's a line of communication. The Prime Minister is a line of communication between the cabinet ministers and the President. So whatever decision is taken, he has to convey that or he has to inform that to the President. The Prime Minister advises the President to summon and prorogue the Parliament and dissolve the Lok Sabha. The Prime Minister advises the President in appointing or removing the high officials. So as I already told you about this, that the whatever decision is taken by the president, so that decision, that the before that the president has to consult the prime minister. Clear? Whether it's the matter of appointing or removing high dignitaries or high officials, or whether it's related to the matter of summoning and to prorogue the parliament or dissolve the Lok Sabha. Clear? Okay, now next is the relationship of prime minister with the with his council of ministers. I told you about the council of ministers. So what is the relationship between the prime minister and his council of ministers? So the council of ministers is headed by the prime minister. There are three categories of ministers, as I already told you about it: cabinet ministers, ministers of states with independent charge, and minister of state. And one more is there, it's not written there, just do write number 3, deputy ministers, right? So let's talk about the cabinet ministers. Are usually the top level leaders of the ruling parties, or who is in a charge of major ministries. Usually the cabinet ministers meet to take decisions in the name of council of ministers. Cabinet is thus the inner ring of the council of ministers. It comprises about 20 to 30 members, or 20 to 30 ministers, right? Not more than that. So now next is ministers of state with independent charge. So there are the ministers who are usually independent, in charge of smaller ministries. They participate in the cabinet meetings only when specially invited. So when we talk about the cabinet meetings on the matter of national issues or national emergency, the cabinet meetings held. So in that cabinet meetings, only cabinet ministers are supposed to attend that, to participate that cabinet meetings. So this ministers of states and deputy ministers, unless they are invited, they are not supposed to join or supposed to participate that cabinet meetings. Clear? Now next is minister of state. It's already done. Now next is deputy ministers. So we can say they are the junior ministers. Third category of ministers, junior ministers, and are placed under the senior ministers, and whom they are to assist. So that deputy minister, they have to assist their senior ministers, right? And they also they do not take part in the cabinet meetings unless they are invited. Clear? Okay, now these are the three categories of ministers. I suggest you to do write the third one, deputy ministers, about the deputy ministers. Now next is prime minister and his relationship with the cabinet and the council of ministers. So he forms a council of ministers and determines its size also. Size means how many members to be there. So that size, number of ministers also is decided by the prime minister. And the categories of ministers, their portfolios, their high ranking, their ranking, the prime minister's decision is final in such a matter. The prime minister can remove a minister from the cabinet or the council of ministers by asking him or her to resign. He can reallocate portfolios, right? So the prime minister has the right to remove or to reallocate the new member or new minister to his cabinet, right? So he can ask any minister to resign, asking him or her to resign from the post, right? Next is the prime minister calls the meetings of the council of ministers, presided over them, and decides the agenda. So prime minister calls for the meeting. So these days the prime minister So, Prime Minister, time to time, he is conducting meetings and deciding agenda on the matters like now these days. He is deciding on the matter of like deciding agenda on the matter of like combating COVID-19 and whether it's on the matter of combating COVID-19 or on the matter of LAC. So he is time to time conducting meetings. That means it's a cabinet meetings, right? So the Prime Minister's calls the meetings of the Council of Ministers, presides over them and decides the agenda on those on the national on the matters of national importance, right? Next is the Prime Minister coordinates the policies and the working of different departments of the government to ensure that all departments work according to the set policies and decision of the cabinet. So he also coordinates, he also supervises, or he also coordinates the policy and the working of all the departments under him or under the government of him to ensure that all the departments are working properly or not, or working according to the set of policies and decisions taken by the cabinet or not, right? So this is also so these are the the Prime Minister and his relationship with the cabinet and the Council of Ministers. And all the Council of Ministers, they have to follow, they have to implement the policies and the decisions made in the cabinet meetings, right? Okay, now next is Prime Minister and his relations with the Parliament. Number one, the Prime Minister is the leader of the Lok Sabha. The Prime Minister is the chief spokesman of the government in the Parliament, and the Prime Minister makes all important announcement of the government policies. Whatever decision is taken in the cabinet meetings, that has to be announced in the on the floor of the House, right? So now next is Prime Minister and his role in foreign affairs. The Prime Minister, there is a Minister of Foreign Affairs, yet the Prime Minister has a significant role in this matter, right? The Prime Minister represents India in international conferences. He goes to the UNO, United Nations Organization. He goes to SAARC and non-aligned nations meetings and puts forward India's point of view before the world leaders, and he may visit any country to improve India's relationships with them and to solve outstanding issues also. He is the chief architect of India's foreign policy. You can say the Prime Minister is the representative of the country in international conferences, right? So Prime Minister, next is Prime Minister as a leader of the nation. So Prime Minister is the acknowledged leader of a nation as a whole, and the nation, that means the people of his nation will look upon him for the leadership, good leadership, right? So actually at the time of general election, it is for or against the prime ministerial candidate that the entire electorate in the country votes, though he or she is contesting from a particular constituency. Thus, we can say that in practical sense, the election of the Prime Minister is a direct choice of the voters. So in other words, if the people want to choose a particular candidate as their Prime Minister, they vote for the candidate of the Prime Minister's party in their constituency. So that means in the practical sense, the Prime Minister is direct choice of the people or of the voters, right? So, in other words, if the people want to choose a particular candidate as a prime minister, then they will vote for the candidate of the prime minister's party in their constituency, in their area. Constituency means it's a well-defined area, right? So they will vote those candidates of the prime minister's party in their area or in their constituency, right, children? Okay, that's all for the day, children. Some important terms still left in this chapter, so we'll be doing this in the next video, and hopefully we'll revise the other chapters for your half-yearly exam, right? So till then, take care and be safe, stay safe. Bye bye.